It's not constitutionally sound, it's not legally sound, it's not jurisprudentially sound, and it is not sound in terms of, you see, it strikes at the fraternity, which is part of the preamble of the Constitution. You are, instead of creating fraternity in the country, encouraging fraternity, you are creating by bringing, today there is a serious divide in the society. All those diehards amongst the majority community say, oh, what is wrong about this Waqf Amending Act? It must be upheld. The Muslims feel that no, this is unconstitutional. Now, this has created a serious divide in the society. There is an Article 13 in the Constitution. Article 13 is part of Fundamental Rights chapter. In fact, the chapter begins with Article 13. Article 13 expressly provides that any law, any order, any notification, any custom which strikes at the fundamental rights is void ab initio. Now, therefore, the burden...
So hang on. The consequence of what you're saying is that the Waqf Amendment Act is void ab initio.
If it is unconstitutional. So,
which is your argument.
Is your argument. So, if it is unconstitutional, which is what my belief is as a lawyer, then it is void, and that's how the constitutional framers wanted it. Why did they provide this protective umbrella in Article 13? They provided this protective umbrella in Article 13 because they wanted the state not to act in derogation of the fundamental rights in any manner.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With the Waqf Act, which is presently before the Supreme Court, has the government unwittingly defied the advice of Babasaheb Ambedkar and Sardar Patel, two men it professes to admire, respect, and treat as icons? Equally importantly, is it only a matter of time before the act is declared unconstitutional and struck down by the Supreme Court? My guest today believes the answer to both questions is an unequivocal yes. Joining me now to explain his views is one of our foremost lawyers, former president of the Supreme Court Bar Association, Dushyant Dave. Mr. Dave, in an article that you wrote for the Indian Express today, Monday the 21st, on the Waqf Act, you began with two quotations from B.R. Ambedkar. He is someone this government professes to admire, respect, and treat as an icon, but these quotations are likely to embarrass the government. The first says, "No government can exercise its power in such a manner as to provoke the Muslim community to rise in rebellion. I think it would be a mad government if it did so." Do you believe this government's treatment of the Muslim community is provoking them to rise in rebellion?
Well, I must say one thing, that series of things which have been happening in last about 10 years are troublesome. And I personally, I'm not a Muslim. I'm a proud Hindu. I'm a proud Brahmin. And yet I feel hurt at, situations like, this love jihad. Take, for example, if a Hindu man were to marry a Muslim girl, nobody wants to object. But if a Muslim boy were to marry a Hindu girl, then, it is termed as love jihad. And the consequences sometimes are extremely, serious, where, the boy is arrested, his family is arrested, sometimes his home is destroyed. So beginning with this love jihad and, Citizenship Amendment Act, you saw recently that when, on the Eid day, Muslims were too many to be, accommodated in a mosque. So they spread out on a road, and the administration on UP has asked them to give a bond running into several lakhs of rupees so that they don't do such a thing. Now, these things are really troublesome. The bulldozer justice, for example, which is targeting essentially, the Muslim community. And despite a stay by the Supreme Court, which I must say that Chief Justice Ramna first gave, and Justice Gawai and Justice Vishwanathan have continued it. Despite all this, the demolitions take place. I think Waqf Act is perhaps the last straw on the camel's back. And it is really troublesome to see why, BJP, which is a responsible party, despite invocations by none other than, Shri Bhagwat ji, the RSS head, who has repeatedly been saying that please, we must have Muslim community as part of our national development. RSS leaders have, the other day only Mr. Hozabale made a very crucial statement that there are 33,000 mosques in the country, are going to dig up every one of them. So, what is really happening is, I would say, a sustained, campaign against the Muslim community. And as I sometimes tell my friends in a lighter vein, perhaps, these extremely right-wing thinking people want to defeat Babur in retrospect. And that is what is troublesome, that you can't just allow the situation to slip to this extent.
You're calling it a sustained campaign against the Muslim community. Is it slowly but steadily and perhaps even increasingly pushing them towards rebellion?
I won't say rebellion. I must say one thing about the Muslim community in this country, and this is a matter of great satisfaction for us, and that the Muslims have retained tremendous faith in the country, in the constitution, and in rule of law. And unlike, Islamic world, where we have seen thousands of, suicide bombings, we have had just one in India, Pulwama. So, so far, the community has respected, perhaps because they have unflinching faith in Indian judiciary.
Okay.
And perhaps because of that faith, they are not losing the hope. So, and I hope and pray, I in fact pray that they never lose that hope. And I assure them that the judiciary will always stand up to protect their rights as enshrined in the Constitution.
The second quotation from Ambedkar in your Indian Express article of today is about what would happen if the Muslim community loses that sense of hope and rebels. He says, and you quote him, "I would like to say two things. One is that minorities are an explosive force, which, if it erupts, can blow up the whole fabric of the state. The history of Europe bears ample and appalling testimony to this fact. The other is that the minorities in India have agreed to place that existence in the hands of the majority." And there he's pointing out both the danger of what the government is doing, as well as the explicit betrayal inherent in it. Both are being pointed out by Ambedkar.
Undoubtedly, Ambedkar was a prophet, and he really foresaw the problems that this country will face in, decades and decades to come. That man was the greatest visionary that I have seen. And, everything, at another point of time, I forget the exact date, but during the Constituent Assembly debate, he spoke something more. He said that, look, I must tell all these, people who want to really, who are diehards and who have fanaticism against the Muslims. He said, what do we want? Do we want wars? Are we going to have wars against the Muslims? And if we have wars, we can never win it. That's what he won. So Ambedkar's reading was an amazing reading, because he did believe that there must be fraternity in society, and democracy can only survive with fraternity, brotherhood of men.
Absolutely. And the point, in a sense, which you're underlining by quoting him so extensively in your article, is the following. Minorities are an explosive force, which, if it erupts, can blow up the whole fabric of the state. These constant taunts, this constant needling, this constant provocation is playing with fire.
It is really sad. I mean, just as Sardar Patel says, put yourself in the shoes of minority community and see the pain that they suffer or what they go through. Which is what I quote in my article.
Let me stop you and quote it for the audience, because I think it's another very important quotation. Sardar Patel again is someone this government professes to admire, respect, and treat as an icon. They've built the tallest statue in the world to him. Yet this is what he said in 1949. It is for us who happen to be in a majority to think about what the minorities feel and how we in their position would feel if we were treated in the manner in which they are treated. In other words, he's saying something very simple, very straightforward, but very powerful. Treat the minorities as you would want to be treated yourself?
Look, Sardar Patel and Ambedkar, they were the greatest sons of this country. They were true nationalists, like many other, hundreds and hundreds of other leaders that freedom movement threw up, whether it was Jawaharlal Nehru or, so many of them. They were greatest men and women. Now, Patel again was the man who actually chaired the drafting committee for the purpose of creating fundamental rights, the Fundamental Rights Committee. He also chaired the Committee for Minority Rights. And this is a man who has given the protection under the Constitution of fundamental rights. Now, fundamental rights includes, the rights for the minority community, or for that matter, every Indian, right to, profess your religion, practice your religion, have your conscience. So that is a man who has given that warning, who tells us very nicely that, look, you must see how the other person is feeling if you are to treat him like this. It's a simple way of putting it. And I do hope, Karan, you must understand, this country is a great country. I mean, it's one of the greatest countries for centuries. Our civilization has been so beautiful. There is no point, today to dig up the old wounds and talk about what happened during the Islamic period into this country. So we have to really understand that these apprehensions that Ambedkar and Sardar Patel had were genuine apprehensions. And they wanted that we must think, big. We must not think in a, narrow-mindedness. We must not think on the on the grounds of religion. We must think ourselves as Indians first.
Absolutely. And both Ambedkar and Patel were, in a very real, meaningful sense, advising and warning the government, not just this government, but all governments. They were giving advice, they were giving warnings, and this government, for the last 10 years, has blatantly ignored that advice.
I think they were giving these warnings, advice, and prophecies for every Indian to be born thereafter. So it was advice to us, to you and me also, and to every Hindu and every Muslim, that this is, a country which cannot progress if it is divisive politics.
Absolutely. But now we have a prime minister today who doesn't hesitate to say with pride as often as he can that Ambedkar is his icon, that Patel is his icon, and yet the advice given by Patel and by Ambedkar is being ignored, it's being trampled upon.
See, what happens is that as they say about the elephants, it has teeth to show and teeth to chew. Now, in politics, many years ago, I was sitting on an aircraft with a very powerful politicians belonging to the Bharatiya Janata Party, very respected. And I did discuss with him, and I told him that why is it that BJP is going on this line? This was almost 30 years ago, going on this line of religious divide. And his answer was very, very pertinent but disturbing. He said that elections are won or lost only on emotive issues. And he says religion is a very emotive issue.
But you're saying something even more worrying. For the sake of winning elections, they're prepared to endanger the fabric of the country. And I'm quoting Ambedkar there.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, a common man today, he doesn't know all this. He doesn't know that, greatest people.
Forget the common man for a moment. What you're pointing out, and I'm underlining it for the audience, is that they may consider Ambedkar and Patel icons. They may claim to respect and follow in their footsteps, but they are trampling on their advice because they want to win elections. They don't care about the consequences to the country. That is what those quotations point out. That is what your story about this man on the plane points out.
Yeah, it is. And it's sad because, listen, I must say one thing. I do not agree with BJP's, thinking, BJP's ideology. But I do respect BJP as an organization because it has a great role to play. We cannot now ignore BJP. Bharatiya Janata Party today is the most,
Absolutely. But this is not about the BJP. I want to move to the second critical issue.
No, therefore, Karan, what really troubles me is that a party which wants to play a great role in developing this country, making India truly vibrant, making India $5 or $50 trillion economy, Why is it not really thinking, big rather than, and does it not know the consequences that are you going to push 170 million people anywhere? I mean, it can never bring happiness to this country. We don't need that happiness. We need progress with peace. We need progress with brotherhood of men. We need progress with love. We don't need, progress with hatred.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Against this background, Dushyant Dave, let's come to the second part of that article you wrote for the Indian Express this morning. It's the Waqf Act. You say, and I'm quoting you, the Act is a majoritarian piece of legislation in complete disregard of the Constitution, the law, the practices, and most of all, the feelings of over 150 million citizens. Before we come to details, and the details are important, but before we come to details, am I right in believing that this is your overall view of the Act, that it is unconstitutional?
Absolutely, because I'll tell you one thing very clearly, that when the Constitution was being drafted, the Muslim community was in existence. The issues, challenges arising from the relationship between Hindus and Muslims were, before the members of the Constituent Assembly. They were very conscious. Yet they said that we must have Article 25 in the Constitution, which protects the freedom of conscience. It protects free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. And we must also have complete freedom to manage religious affairs. Now,
can I pause you there? Because
yes.
in your article, you say the Waqf Amendment Act 2025 strikes at the root of fundamental rights in Articles 25 and 26 of the Constitution. Let's, for those who aren't aware of these articles, take that step by step. Article 25 protects freedom of conscience as well as free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. Tell the audience, how does the Waqf Act breach Article 25?
You will have to read them conjointly, 25 and 26, because Article 26 is also giving us a freedom of administering religious institutions. Now, Waqf is undoubtedly a religious, act, because ultimately every Muslim is expected to, give back something to the society. That's what their religion tells them. As Hindus, we also do. We do our charities, our endowments, for our community. Likewise, they do it for their community. And it is out of, religious purposes, out of pious purposes, or it is out of, their belief from the Quran. So whatever may be, 25 and 26, these two articles are not confined to Muslims alone. They are given to every one of us. If I, as a Hindu, as part of my, right to practice religion, I follow a particular practice, I create an institution, and I say that I want to do this, have this trust, and I want to do it for the benefit of, every Indian, irrespective of religion. The state has no right to interfere with that. If I were to buy a land and, give it for, children from all communities, 50 years later, state can't come back and say, oh, no. Now, this religious institution, we don't know where the document is, what it is, and therefore we take it over. That is impermissible, because this is precisely what the constitutional framers wanted to protect, our freedom of religion. And that freedom is, encompassing freedom. Every Indian be it Hindu, Christian, Sikh, Muslim, Parsi, everybody is entitled to have this right protected under the Constitution.
And you're saying to me that the Waqf Act explicitly breaches, and I'm talking first about Article 25, freedom of conscience, as well as free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. You're saying the Act breaches that?
Not the Waqf Act, the amending Act.
Absolutely.
The amendment of
earlier this
2025,
month.
yes, the amendment of 2025 is virtually seeking to nullify the existing waqfs, which may be, I mean, I don't know exact figure, but it is said that there are more than 8.5 lakh waqfs existing in this country.
4,000 of them, according to Abhishek Singhvi, out of 8,000, sorry, 4 lakhs out of 8 lakhs are said to be waqf by user.
Yes. Now, what happens that these waqfs have been, Muslims came into this country in the 11th century. Now, since then, waqfs have been created in one form or the other, be it by the emperors, be it by the rich Muslims, be it by the poor Muslims. And for generations, those waqfs have been in existence. And those waqfs have been, helping the Muslim community. Now, if you have, therefore, waqfs in existence, which have been used as waqfs. It's like a temple. Take, for example, go to Tughlaq Road, right here in heart of Delhi, Tughlaq Road, where, the honorable ministers, honorable MPs and honorable judges stay. Their bungalows are there. There was a small little temple when I came to Delhi in 1986. Today, there is a big temple. It's right on the road. It's on the side of the road, but it is, occupying a public space. Now, over the years, it has become an institution. Everybody goes and pays, obeisance to the Lord there. Nothing wrong about it. But, and it becomes therefore an institution. You can't, tomorrow turn around and say, oh, this has been illegally built, therefore we will now have it demolished. Now, this is what is bothering me, that why is it that you are singling out these kind of, waqfs or these kind of creations for a particular community when it is happening in every religion?
Let me put to you the answer that Kiran Rijiju, the minorities minister, makes with specific reference to Article 26. He says his argument is that the management of waqfs is done by mutawallis, not by the Waqf board or Waqf councils. So if non-Muslims in some small number are included into the Waqf board and the Waqf council, it won't affect the actual running. It won't interfere, therefore, with Article 26. How do you respond to that?
Look, every religion wants to confine these kind of charitable, religious and pious activities to their own religion. Even Hindus wouldn't want Muslims to walk into Hindu endowments. Likewise, the Muslims wouldn't want it to come. Parsis, for example, they will never allow Parsi institutions to be manned by non-Parsis. Sikhs would not allow that. SGPC will say, oh, nothing doing. How can you come in? It's the exclusive right of the Sikh community. Fair enough. That's what this country is about. For thousands of years, this country has survived on this, protection. See, it's not just the constitution which has given this freedom of religion. For thousands of years, freedom of religion has been in existence in this country, and people have been enjoying that freedom without being interfered by, anybody.
So you're saying that Kiran Rijiju's argument, A, goes against tradition going back thousands of years, and secondly, it fundamentally doesn't understand that Muslims want to look after their religious endowments and their religious institutions just as Hindus do in their case, or Buddhists in their case, Parsis or Sikhs in their case. He's creating one law for Muslims and treating all the other faiths differently.
Simple answer is this, that this is a freedom which is constitutionally protected. I'll tell you something very interesting. There is an Article 13 in the Constitution. Article 13 is part of Fundamental Rights chapter. In fact, the chapter begins with Article 13. Article 13 expressly provides that any law, any order, any notification, any custom which strikes at the fundamental rights is void ab initio. Now, therefore, the burden...
So hang on. The consequence of what you're saying is that the Waqf Amendment Act is void ab initio.
If it is unconstitutional. So,
which is your argument.
Yes. So if it is unconstitutional, which is what my belief is as a lawyer, then it is void. And that's how the constitutional framers wanted it. Why did they provide this protective umbrella in Article 13? they provided this protective umbrella in Article 13 because they wanted the state not to act in derogation of the fundamental rights in any manner. So fundamental rights were sacrosanct, they were untouchable. And
So
you can't therefore.
So when the Supreme Court, in effect, ensured that the government would not take any action in terms of the Act with regard to Waqf by user properties or with regard to Waqf councils and Waqf boards, the Supreme Court was, in your opinion, doing precisely the right thing. It was doing what it was required to do.
Absolutely. Look, ultimately, Article 32 is also a fundamental right. And what's Article 32? Right to move the Supreme Court for violation of fundamental rights is guaranteed to every citizen, to you and me and everybody. Now, Supreme Court is therefore the custodian of the fundamental rights. And as being a custodian, the Supreme Court is bound to step in as and when we point out that fundamental rights are violated by the state, be it by the central government, be it by the state government, be it by parliamentary law, be it by a state law, be it by executive action. In any and every manner, if fundamental right, even if it is violated by a private citizen. Supposing a private citizen kidnaps another, and I file a habeas corpus saying that my relative has been kidnapped by Mr. X, Supreme Court is bound to step in because that's a fundamental right and it can issue a writ against a private person to produce that person. So, this it is very interesting. The Supreme Court, and, this is where Ambedkar, was such a genius. When the draft constitution was given to him on the first day, he criticized the draft, which must have been prepared by, great experts, saying that you have given the rights, but you have not given the remedies. What good are rights if there is no remedy? So then he conceived Article 32 and Article 226. And Ambedkar goes on to say that if I had to put my finger on any one article of this constitution, which is the heart and soul of the constitution, it is Article 32. It's a sad commentary. Let me tell you one thing, that Supreme Court has, virtually forgotten its duty under Article 32 and is driving people away to the High Courts time and again when fundamental rights are expressly violated and are pointed out.
In this instance, the Supreme Court has acted correctly.
Absolutely, and no more so. Not only Supreme Court, Karan. Why is it that the learned Solicitor General made a statement saying that we will not take any steps? Because perhaps the government also realized not only that the Supreme Court was likely to grant a stay, but that there may be something which may require rethinking. So, you also must understand that the Supreme Court refrained from giving the stay which it wanted to because the learned Solicitor General appearing for Government of India said that we will maintain a status quo. We will not do anything.
Let's come to two measures in that Waqf Amendment Act on which the Supreme Court at the moment has not made clear its position. I want to put them to you. The first is the part or clause of the Act that says that the collector will determine whether Waqf properties which are allegedly in dispute are actually Waqf properties or whether they belong to the government or whether they belong to someone else. A lot of Muslims find this offensive and objectionable. Where do you stand on it?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Right from 1954, the first beautiful judgment from the Supreme Court came in Shirur Math's case. And subsequently, it has been followed in two other cases, Ratilal Gandhi, which was a Bombay Public Trust Act, and there was an Orissa Act, which was challenged. They were all, challenged at the instance of the Hindus. And the Supreme Court struck down many provisions of the Madras Endowment Act, Religious Endowment Act, the Orissa Religious Endowment Act, and Bombay Public Trust Act, respectively, in 1954 alone. And those three judgments are Magna Carta on Articles 25 and 26.
And what do they say?
And they say that these articles are absolutely untouchable, directly or indirectly, and giving, in one of those cases, the powers was given to the commissioner to do something like the collector is now to be given. They said, you can't. You cannot give away these powers to the commissioners. These are religious institutions which are protected under Article 26 and therefore they are untouchable. You cannot let the community do it and community must do it. So there is a discussion on law on this.
In other words, What the Supreme Court did as far back as 1954 sets the precedent for the Supreme Court when it looks at this more closely, saying you cannot give these powers to the collector. It would be unconstitutional. It would be ultra vires Articles 25 and 26, and therefore this is likely to be struck down.
Not only the judgments, but those judgments become the law of the land. By virtue of Article 141, they are the law of the land. And by virtue of Article 144, every civil and judicial authority must act in aid of the Supreme Court. I am really surprised that before bringing this act, the government did not apply its mind seriously. They seem to have had some discussion, some committee and some, a reference somewhere or the other. But nobody seems to have seen these judgments, which are so clear to my mind, that on the basis of the law so declared by the Supreme Court, which struck down, mind you, at the instance of Hindus, the Supreme Court struck down many provisions which are somewhat akin to the provisions now in the amending Waqf Act.
Okay. A second clause that is deemed by the Muslims to be controversial and offensive is the clause which stipulates that waqfs can only be created by someone who has been a practicing Muslim for at least 5 years. One of the people who has gone in protest to the Supreme Court against this is Assuddin Owaisi, but there are many others. Are they correct to say this is wrong? This is again an interference in our rights under Articles 25 and 26?
Well, there is no doubt in my mind that many of the provisions of the amending act have extremely, I would say, diabolical effect on the rights of the minority communities to profess their religion. And
but what about this one in specifically?
It on the face of it unconstitutional. You cannot, how do you expect today? In every sense, every institution, not just the Muslim institutions like Waqfs, but in many institutions which are, religious institutions, you might not find documents at all. But over the years, these institutions have been treated and revered as religious institutions by communities. And you have to respect that you can't now ask somebody that, 100 years ago, you started worshipping, tell me how you started worshipping here. So that's something which is, state must, one thing is very interesting. There are no individual claims against Waqf properties on a large scale basis. No, people have said that, my property has been taken away in the garb of this Waqf. Okay. And if such things happen, civil court has always a right to see the documents and decide that, yes, this property belongs to Mr. X and doesn't belong to Waqf. That right is never taken away. That right exists in spite of Articles 25 and 26. But for a state to bring a legislation like this and by a general fiat by one article, one section 3 to say, and that is why the old act had expressly said in section 3 rule R, subsection clause R, that Waqf by user is recognized.
And it was recognized by the Supreme Court in the Ayodhya judgment explicitly.
Absolutely. Expressly, 5 justices of the Supreme Court say Waqf by user is not only expressly recognized by the statute, but jurisprudence of this country has recognized it over 100 years.
The clear impression that you're giving the audience is that this Waqf Amendment Act is very poorly thought through by the government. Not only does it fundamentally breach, as you pointed out, Articles 25 and 26, but it is also in defiance of and in contradiction with jurisprudence and earlier judgments passed by the Supreme Court itself. And therefore, at both levels, it looks as if the government and its advisors and whoever writes acts on behalf of the government simply haven't done their homework.
I don't know what homework they did it, or whether they did the homework, they knew the law and yet they did it. I'm not sure what really has made with them. But yes, if they were well advised, they should have perhaps refrained from bringing this amending act. It is not it's not constitutionally sound, it's not legally sound, it's not jurisprudentially sound, and it is not sound in terms of, it strikes at the fraternity, which is part of the preamble of the Constitution. You are, instead of creating fraternity in the country, encouraging fraternity, you are creating by bringing, today there is a serious divide in the society. all those diehards amongst the majority community say, oh, what is wrong about this Waqf Amending Act? It must be upheld. The Muslims feel that no, this is unconstitutional. Now, this has created a serious divide in the society, and it is not needed.
Tell me this. Tell me this. You understand the Supreme Court. You study the Supreme Court. You know the Constitution. What is your gut instinct telling you? Will the Supreme Court, whenever it fully hears this case, which hopefully will happen fairly soon, strike it down as unconstitutional?
I cannot say what the Supreme Court will do. I can only say what my opinion is, my view is, and my belief is that the Amending Act is per se, ex facie, unconstitutional, and therefore it should be declared as unconstitutional.
Dushyant Dave, thank you very much for spending time with me to explain your views on the Act, and thank you in particular for bringing the attention of the audience to those two quotations from Baba Sahib Ambedkar and that one quotation from Sardar Patel, men that this government professes to respect, admire, and treat it icons, but whose critical advice is being blatantly, repeatedly, and almost every day ignored. That, I think, is particularly eye-opening for the audience because it reveals the extent to which this government understands Ambedkar and Patel, the extent to which they want to follow their advice, or the extent to which they simply want to use them, as they say, naam ke vaste, but do whatever else they want. I thank you for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.